Thanks so much, Bobby, and welcome to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and spend a little time with you this afternoon. As Bobby said, Scott and I have been contracted by Campus Compact to work with them on their federal agenda. I did also want to introduce another of our Washington Navigator colleagues, Michelle Farmer, who's on the screen there and is the key to our successful operation of our PowerPoint today, along with about 100 other things we ask her to do on a regular basis. So thanks for doing that. Just real quick, some background on Scott and I. We've been in town combined, I think, over about 50 years in Washington, D.C. So we have worked very closely with colleges and universities, running Washington offices, engaging with them on public policy and advocacy issues. And we're just very excited to be engaged with Campus Compact. We think the issues, the voice, the messaging that they are working on is just so very important to the dialogue right now. We're going to talk a little bit later in the presentation about some of that dialogue that's around higher education in Washington and across the country and how that's impacting the work we're doing with Campus Compact. But let me just sort of dive right in now to our presentation, which I think will take us about 15, 20 minutes or so. And then, as Bobby said, we look forward to any questions, conversation, comments, etc. So we at Washington Navigators have been working with Bobby and her team on a federal agenda for the organization. And the key top-level priorities are on this first slide here: community engaged partnerships, looking at colleges and universities as anchors in their communities, the importance of civic learning, the need for an ongoing dialogue. And you can already see how all of these are sort of interrelated with each other. And then lastly, of course, the important role of national service and public service. Now, how we're trying to accomplish these, I want to just look at this next slide here and talk a little bit about that. Really three umbrella areas that we're looking at for Compact's agenda. The first is to establish Compact as a voice in Washington. And what we mean by that is, in our work with Compact, we really, at the start of it, took a look at where are the gaps in the policy conversation in Washington around higher education and higher education's role in their communities, states, regions. And one of the key areas that we discovered was there was a real lack of a voice around civic and community engagement. And so we are looking for how to really elevate Compact's role in that area and impact on policymaking. So some examples that have been done to date: a letter sent that we drafted and worked with to the Appropriations Committee supporting AmeriCorps funding and federal works study funding, both of which have been under attack this year during this appropriations process. We are looking for targeted sign-on opportunities that are consistent with those priorities that I talked about on the previous slide. We have already held a very successful, what we called Presidential Policy Summit, where we brought about 25 leaders from across Compact's membership to Washington to meet with agencies and others who are impacting different areas of interest and priorities for the organization. People such as the Economic Development Administration, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Department of Housing. We walked over and met at the White House with the Office of Science and Technology Policy, all to sort of help educate those individuals about what Compact and its members are doing and what their priorities are, but also to hear from them about what opportunities might exist for partnerships down the line. Going forward, looking at the second bullet, increasing awareness and visibility. Webinars like today are one of the examples of what we're trying to do there. We are looking to go bigger with the presidential summit next year, which actually may slip into early 2025, and we'll talk a little bit about why that is, because of the presidential election year that we're in the midst of. And also updating some of the communications and website aspects as they relate to this agenda. And I know that page, I believe, is live now. And we will be updating that with information along the lines of the issues that we're talking with you about today. And then the last bullet, it really is focused on the funding piece. We are looking for opportunities to support Compact's work and support the members of Compact in their work. That can include, as I mentioned above, support for the appropriations process as it relates to things like AmeriCorps, but we're also looking at opportunities around community projects, or what are more colloquially known as earmarks. One in particular that's highlighted here is around foster youth housing and the opportunities that exist there. And we're happy to talk more about that if that's of interest during our conversation. Next, Michelle. So the provocative title of this conversation talked about it being an election year, a contentious year. And I just wanted to spend just a minute or two about why that is, and also what effect that's going to have as we look at our legislative and federal agenda. Presidential years, too quick, Michelle. Presidential years are short legislative sessions, and it is going to be even worse this year because we still haven't finished last year's budget. So the desire in Congress is going to be to get things done, get them done quickly, and get out of town. Typically, the policy agendas are driven by the campaigns, and we do not tend to see a lot of new legislation, new priorities put in place during a presidential election year, in large part because both parties envision being in control 10 months from now, and they'd rather try to push their priorities in that circumstance than try and get something done quickly here. So we expect a very short congressional calendar this year, probably as close to the end of September as possible, so folks can get home and they can campaign. Doesn't mean they're going to finish everything before they do that, but it does mean that any agenda, any work that we're doing in Washington is going to be under a very tight and compressed timeline. And specifically, another aspect to that has to do with Congress's makeup itself. Just real quick here, I'm sure many of you have seen graphics similar to this. We have one of the tightest House and Senate majorities in history right now. 51-49 in the Senate, Democratic, 220, 213 Republican in the House. And I think that's even a little, I think it might even be 219 right now because of some illnesses and things like that. We already have heard of 42 retirements in the House. It's really a toss-up as to where that could end up in 2025. The Senate is a hard path for Democrats to maintain control because they are defending twice as many seats as the Republicans are. You could pretty much envision scenarios where you see anything from a democratically controlled Congress and White House to a Republican controlled Congress and White House. And the likelihood is we'll see something mixed up in between there. So that's sort of a quick download of the circumstances in Washington right now, some of the challenges, some of the issues associated with the presidential campaign. But as I sort of hinted at the start, overlaying all of this is really some truly challenging messaging and issues that higher education itself is facing. And I'm gonna step aside for a few minutes, turn it over to my partner Scott, and he's going to take the wheel here for the next few slides. Scott?
Thank you, Bill. So I get to talk about all the bad news, huh? So yes, I mean, I know all of you know this. In fact, some of you are on campuses that are dealing with this personally, or you're in states that are implementing new laws that restrict how you can characterize and talk about certain initiatives that are important to higher education. But yes, as the recent media demonstrates, I'm not up on season 23 of Law and Order, but apparently it was episode 1 was all about strife in higher education on campus that leads to a murder. I don't want to blow the plot line for those of you who haven't seen it yet. Bill mentioned at the beginning, we've both of us have been around the block a time or two. But I have to tell you, and higher ed is from time to time, particularly over issues of cost and access, can be in the national press. But I don't think we've ever been at this point where there is, such strong negative views of higher education in our community that get reflected in so many ways. You've seen it in the polling data. I do want to take note of, in this slide on the right-hand side, two pieces of legislation, one that passed the House even with bipartisan support, that while it doesn't go directly to the work that you do in the community, at the community level and civic engagement, it does reflect the level of not only distrust, but the level of anger with higher education. This bill, the Deterrent Act, just creates an astronomical level of a burden on further reporting requirements to universities around foreign gifts and contracts. And it passed the House floor with Democratic votes. Now, I don't think it's going to go anywhere in the Senate this year, but nonetheless, it is an example of just kind of what we're up against as a community right now. This other bill, the College Cost Reduction Act, which is actually scheduled for markup in the House Education Committee tomorrow morning. And many of you, your presidents, have already been hearing from higher ed associations this week, urging them to contact members. This bill would radically change the financial aid system. It would basically hold universities accountable for a certain percentage of student loan defaults that you would end up having to pay for. Again, this isn't going anywhere. And to Bill's point earlier, with this being an election year, this is also a messaging year in Congress. A lot of bills, particularly impacting our sector, are going to be about sending a message and not necessarily about good legislating. However, we have to always be prepared and to be thinking how the message of today could become the legislation of tomorrow, or and gain broader support. Next slide, please. But let's spend just a minute on the here and now. Normally, if we were having a webinar with you this time of year, we'd be talking about a president's upcoming State of the Union address to talk about the budget request to Congress for FY25. But as you all know, we haven't finished 24 yet. Bill and I just came from some meetings on the Hill just this week. The Appropriations Committee have received their allocation of funding, and everyone's going to take a haircut. We don't know how much yet. Some of us have had quite a haircut, but that's another story. But some of the programs that we've been following for the community, like AmeriCorps and Federal Work Study. Just a quick refresher here: the big dramatic differences in the funding levels between the House and the Senate. And of course, in the work study is very problematic because the House provided zero. Now, there's going to be a compromise. There will be some common ground. We don't know yet what that money, what that funding level will look like, but we do know that even with all of the change in leadership on the Hill and with all of the partisanship going on, there is no stomach on either side of the aisle for another shutdown. So we are reasonably confident that there will be a final budget for FY24 March 1st and March 8th, because they bifurcated the appropriations into two separate buckets this year. Community projects are in these bills too, and some of you may have some of these community projects. So we do expect that they will make it across the finish line. In fact, they're probably one of the key reasons that we'll even get a final bill, because members do want to bring home some bacon on both sides of the aisle. while there's lots of uncertainty on what the final numbers will be, and I think, we just came from a meeting from involving a state with significant interest in NASA programs and a community that strongly supports NASA. And even this member was saying, NASA's going to take cuts, and NASA never takes cuts like this. And so it's like I said, it's going to be we're going to be tightening our belt. Next. So in FY25, we are going to, as soon as we're done with this FY24 appropriations and budget, we start working on 25. For those of you who are plugged into your community, or to your government relations offices, some members are already publishing deadlines for your appropriations requests for FY25. So we do need to be thinking about the next year. And while funding will again be tight, there will be funding. There will be decisions made about what programs get funded. And just one reminder on community projects. And we did a webinar, my colleague Bill did last year for Campus Compact. There are different rules in the House and the Senate. Some senators participate, some do not, same on the House side. But if you're in a congressional district whose member does participate, or you're in a state whose senator participates, earmarked are open to nonprofits, municipalities, which nonprofits will include everyone on this phone call. They are restricted to certain federal programs, and the guidelines again for the Senate are different than for the House. You need support letters from community interest, but programs like community centers, access for underserved for education, child care centers, those are all potential projects. Again, tight deadlines. We would expect, if you're working with your university on something like this, we would expect that you're going to need to submit it to the respective member by April 1st. And we can help you, give you some advice on how to go about this. We are working with Campus Compact on some significant, we think, opportunities to address some needs in the community around access and community engagement. Next. So while this is a messaging year, it's also an opportunity year. We are looking at a broad landscape of civic engagement for the university community. In fact, we believe that your offices are really at the epicenter of how we're going to demonstrate the value proposition of higher education in this challenging environment. Even though you see a lot of partisanship going on, there is still bipartisanship. And one area where there is bipartisanship is around the need for civic engagement and the need for civil discourse. One member, Derek Kilmer, who led the effort in the previous Congress to pass the Building Civic Bridges Act. He is retiring. Now, that's actually a motivation to him. He wants to get this bill reintroduced. He's working hard to across the aisle to get support both among Republican colleagues in the House and working with Campus Compact and a broader community, including Interfaith America, the YMCA, a lot of local service support organizations to build some momentum to get this bill reintroduced. Do we think that this would pass in this Congress? No, but we think this is a great opportunity to, again, A, don't give up, and B, lay the foundation for the next Congress. Kilmer wants to pass the baton to some members who will be in the next Congress and who will be willing to take this up. So, no new money, no real new programs, but this is still a great time to be thinking about, again, a long-term strategy. And we have to make some of these investments now to get members to start thinking about how can the federal government impact community engagement? What does access look like in a rural community? Many of these, you're on the front lines. You're dealing in these communities all the time. And so Campus Compact is now having these conversations with members of Congress. Again, not so much to get something across the finish line this year, but to lay the foundation for a new Congress. Next. So, Bill can chime in, and we're eager to take questions, but this is both a messaging year for those running for re-election, and it's a messaging opportunity year for us to demonstrate our value, the value of higher education. And I think so much of that is done at the community level, where you all work so effectively. And part of our challenge is going to be taking what you're already doing and just sharing it with Congress. And so they see it, and they see this whole effort in a new lens. But we are excited to work with you. Happy to take any questions, and we're looking forward to seeing many of you in Denver as well. Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, Scott, let me just put a real quick bow on something you said, which I think is really important. Obviously, everything you said was very important, but it really jumped out at me. Right now, the level of trust in higher education is at 36% by the American public. It's an all-time low. And I really think that the message that Scott was just highlighting around the role colleges and universities can play in their communities around civic and community engagement is a foundation upon which we can begin to build that trust back. And that's going to be a key part of our message this year, and I think a really important role that Campus Compact can play. So with that, yes, questions, comments, provocative statements. I think you can feel free to drop it in the chat if that's easier for you. But I think otherwise, throw up a hand, or we'll just take the credit for having covered everything so finely that we've left nothing to chance. I see thank you, Ben. Question: how does all of this intersect with the demographic cliff? So I think by that you mean the fewer people that would even are college age and would be attending college, and how does that the challenges that creates? If that, assuming that is where the direction you're headed, yes, thank you. It's a really good point, because not only are we seeing that, but that is coupled with the fact that fewer people are even trying to go to college that could be eligible to go. So we are seeing a real challenge at a number of colleges and universities across the country in enrollment. And it is really inspiring them to get creative with how they can attract and draw in new students. And again, I think this does go back to the message of community and civic engagement, looking for ways to engage potential students in the region, because with the demographic issues, and again, coupled with those trust issues that I was just talking about, yeah, there's a number of schools, as I'm sure you're well aware, that are really teetering at this point, and it's going to be a challenge going forward. Scott, have you
Yeah,
anything to add to that?
Ben, if I could just add, and by the way, really hard question to start things off, but now it's just a little bit of a silver lining, but you know, we did see recent data. I think it's within the last couple of days that the level of attendance that, of course, dropped off precipitously after during COVID is beginning to turn back up. That's good news. That certainly doesn't address the demographic cliff. But I also think it's interesting, and I would point many of you, if you haven't seen the article in the Chronicle of Higher Education today about you know, the concern that a lot of college presidents have with how we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in this political environment. And they were their point was to focus on all access. And the other thing that I thought that was really impressive about this group of presidents is they were predominantly community college. And so, you know, I think that that is a potential pathway to get so many more people back into education, or people who've never been there before. And I think we have to continue to help support and elevate efforts like that.
Alexis.
Yes, hi. I'm Alexis. I'm what is my title again? Executive Director of Community Engagement at Weber State University in Ogden, Utah. And you know, one of the things you said really stood out to me because our governor is trying to replicate a program that Governor Moore has created for AmeriCorps, where it's a bridge, right? Like a bridge year where students in our state in particular, we have a precipitous number of students who aren't enrolling anywhere. And so we're thinking that might be the population to focus on for that. But also he's a Republican. And so I think, you know, he could be a real ally to approach our congressional delegation to make sure that AmeriCorps is being funded. So that's just one thought, and so if others have Republican governors that you could reach out to, that'd be great. The other thought I have, you know, my scholarship is in higher ed. And I think one of the things that has been really challenging is that we have continued to have the narrative that higher education is an individual good rather than a public good. And so I think Campus Compact is obviously an important contributor to that conversation, but I think all of us need to be really thoughtful about how we begin to change that narrative. And that relates back to the student loan piece that you all shared, right? Like, we actually want to be investing in higher ed so people aren't having debt, rather than you know, placing blame on institutions for the fact that there's been divestment from higher ed for decades. So just a couple of my thoughts.
Alexis, we're going to want your phone number. That's some excellent points that we'd like to follow up with you on. And, you know, and as a public good, I mean, and I know you all see this. And of course, it's the same with, you know, how often do the polls say that everybody hates Congress, but they love their local congressman? It's almost analogous to higher ed right now. They hate us, but boy, when you're in the community and they look around, a lot of the times, everyone sees the local public good. I know we have town gown issues some places, but a lot of local public good, and that is something we need to emphasize.
If I could just jump in on that, I think it's a great point, Alexis, and I see Bill has his hand up too. But I think something that has been, you know, in my work with Bill and Scott, that has been really, I think, has just had me thinking in different ways. And I think it gets to your point, Alexis, that as a field, I've been involved in so many conversations over the years that are around like, how do we make our case at local levels, at state levels? How do we really reinforce the role of civic and community engagement? Because it's such a localized thing. How do we talk about it in terms of our assessment and our measurements and metrics? And what Scott and Bill have been really honest with me about, particularly, having spent their entire careers in DC and working with agencies, is that no one necessarily has been carrying this flag of the broader public good mission of higher ed. Exactly to your point, Alexis, that, there's been good work that's maybe come from Learn and Serve grants or from some work in AmeriCorps, but collectively talking about it as a field and as an impact area. When Scott and Bill, when we started with a landscape analysis that they did with us last year before we really jumped in to really assess and to have our board assess, can we make an impact? Is there a space to do something really significant? And it really came back after a lot of conversations with agency heads, other higher ed associations, that this is really an area of giant gap. And that, we really, as a field and as Compact, have the capacity to do something significant. But I do want to illuminate something they've said to me over and over again. You can't expect to hit it out of the ballpark on the first round. That we need to both be advancing specific initiatives and appropriations, but also building the voice and really building the capacity for our institutions and for higher education writ large, I think, to take the mission of civic and community engagement really differently. So just wanted to add that. And I see two folks have their hands up. I think Bill was first.
Hi. Hello, everyone. Good to see you. Bill, Scott, good to see you again. I'm here in Texas. For those of you who don't know, I'm Bill Coppola. One more day left as president of the Tarrant County College Southeast Campus. Here, I know you know that in the last legislative session, House Bill 8 passed that completely changed the funding model for community colleges in Texas to move it more towards outcome-based funding. And what we're seeing more is that we're getting more funding for non-credit, short-term based, short length based micro-credentials to put people quickly into the workforce rather than the traditional student. In other words, the humanities are going away, to have students transfer on that. Do we hear anything on the Hill or within appropriations about moving more to a short-term credentialing or towards building an educated workforce and kind of having that as a terminal degree rather than trying to do that?
Mr. President, good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
Well, a couple of things on that front. Nothing has happened in the appropriations yet, but on the authorizing side in the House Education Committee, they recently marked up a change in the Pell Grant program that made the Pell Grant available for short-term educational programs. And the bill that they're scheduled to mark up tomorrow is a significant shift towards performance-based and outcome-based measures, including establishing a median income level that if students, when they graduate, don't get jobs that are within that earning level, then the university is penalized. So it's kind of a crazy market here right now.
Got to raise the minimum wage first. So.
Yeah, well, I know. Every time a member wants to bring up the low-paying jobs that the students get when they graduate with these great degrees, I often want to, they're often going into teaching and public law enforcement. So is that our problem or the state's problem?
I think we have a question. I apologize. Is it Gent or Gent or?
Hi, it's Gent.
Gent. Please.
Yeah. So first of all, I just want to say thank you for this conversation. I think it's really enlightening. It's my first time actually joining one of these webinars, and it's been very informative. I'm calling in from Massachusetts. I'm a student here in the UMass system, and I'm just really curious on what y'all think about the partnerships that can be created between campus compact and, student governments on different campuses or student-led organizations on different campuses. Like, as somebody that's super involved in both of those things on my campus, I think it would be, very beneficial to push ideas of civic engagement within those, those realms. I mean, I try to be really involved things with like voter registration and things like that, and trying to, incentivize other students to do it. But I think on like a larger level, student government, student-led organizations, they're kind of missing from this process, I think. And I guess I'm just curious on if that's something that y'all have given any thought, or if it's something that maybe is, whatever your thoughts are.
Well, be happy to ask Bobby to also comment on this, but I think Bill and I would tell you from experience here in Washington that first of all, students make great advocates. I have worked with many student groups to come to Washington to talk on issues on Capitol Hill, whether it's funding for financial aid, support for STEM programs, or in recent years, student athletes talking about their experience as a student and an athlete on a collegiate campus. So yours is an important voice, but I would imagine even more so in the connection between the university's mission and civic engagement and the role that students play in that. Bobby?
So my internet is a little unstable, so I don't want to put Natalie or Will on the spotlight, but I think if they could jump in, I mean, I think, again, I'm so glad Will called you out for being a Newman Civic Fellow. So I'm so thrilled you're here. I was looking really quickly for a set of videos that Phi Theta Kappa, which is the Honor Society, and I think I'm getting it right, the Honor Society for Community College students. They just produced a series of videos that I thought did just an incredible job of illuminating really the student voice, particularly on the issues of anti-DEI legislation. So I think that's an example of also how we can effectively partner in the advocacy space, like how we can really put students at the center of these conversations and students at the center of the storytelling and making the case. So I think, I know all of us are happy to hear you kind of raising your hand and saying, what can we do together? There's a whole lot of us, me included on this call, that I know are past student government folks ourselves and just really continue to be interested in thinking about how we force those connections. And Natalie, I saw you turned your video on. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would just say, we're really excited to be working with our student design team and thinking about how we engage students a lot more productively and deeply. And I think this is a huge part of that, is like, we want to center the student voice in that piece. So I think there's just going to be a lot of opportunities thinking about sort of the compact work moving forward and where we can elevate student voice. And also with a lot of our partners that we're talking to, that's been a huge piece of how we want to do this, right? So how do student voices get centered in lots of different places? So excited to be able to continue that conversation, particularly around the policy conversation.
Thank you.
As we're waiting, please speak up if anyone has any more questions or comments, but a couple folks have used the word story or storytelling, and that has really resonated with me. In a recent meeting I was at with about 20 university and college presidents, we started the meeting with a lot of frustration around the idea, around the data point that a college and university degree is so obviously beneficial to lifetime earnings potential, to opportunity creation. Why isn't that just the end of the discussion? And by the end of the meeting, we'd sort of come back around and sort of to an admittance, if you will, that we need new stories because these aren't working. And what seems obvious in many ways, or seems like it should be very compelling, is for whatever reason, and there's, it could be political, demographic, what public relations, it's not working. So we need to look for new stories. And I think the fact, as I said, I've heard that sort of concept mentioned a couple times. I think there's a growing acknowledgement of this. And I think one of those stories is what we were just discussing about engaging students in the conversation and really putting them out front. But it's also focusing on the local engagement and the opportunities that exist and building on what Scott talked about, how there tends to be a lot of love and affection for one's local school, one's local university. And how do you sort of get that message up at the federal level and away and sort of move beyond kind of the sort of esoteric, I just don't have faith anymore in what that means. So sorry for the aside, but I didn't see a question, so I thought I would just add that to the discussion. Anybody else?
When I wanted to ask folks that are on here, if folks don't have necessarily a question, but a comment to make, I think if there are, as we're envisioning how we can, advance this agenda, and you kind of heard from Scott and Bill of the priority areas and some of the action steps, I also just want to make sure there's space here for folks to offer up like, hey, look, this is a resource I could use, or this is a way I'd like to be engaged, but I don't know how to get started with that, or this is something Compact should consider looking into or kind of seeing if there's a path to support. So just want to make sure anybody, and I know we have some partner organizations also on here, so anybody can also just use this space, I think, to comment or share something related to this conversation.
Yeah, and just building on that, Bobby, Scott and I are going to do 2 more of these at least this year. And if folks have feedback on, something that they would like us to expand upon, or just looking a little forward on the year and what's likely to be occurring here in Washington or around the country politically, if there's a topic or topics that you'd really like us to dive into and speak about, please share that. Always welcome feedback. Well, Bobby, it looks like we might be able to give people a couple of minutes of their day back.
I know everybody welcomes that. So I will say Scott and Bill are going to be with us here in Denver in a couple months for Compact 24, and would welcome an opportunity to connect with any members. Part of this is, we're only going to be as strong as we really understand what the network needs and where those opportunities to elevate stories are. So please, seek me out or seek them out if you'd like to connect while you're here. And with that, thanks everybody for being here. We'll see you all really soon.